Hi everybody, this is Old Man Computer. My name is Don, and this is my Last of Us Part 2 commentary, review, reaction video, whatever you want to call it. Basically my thoughts on the game and on the controversy that is surrounding this game as of right now. I'm going to warn everybody right away, this is spoiler heavy. I am not going to pull punches on any of the details. I'm just basically going to talk about everything. So if you haven't played the game yet, you probably should do that first if you're scared of ruining the story. But if you already know how the story goes and you're looking for an additional take on it, if you're looking for a voice that is maybe not necessarily the way most gamers have gone, this is a good video for you to watch. So, or at least I hope it is anyway. So I'm going to start with basically that this is a hard game to play. After playing the first game through at least 5 times and loving every minute of it and really getting connected with the characters Ellie and Joel and just feeling like their journey was set to continue in this game. I stayed away from spoilers in advance of this game's launch. I stayed away from walkthroughs and online videos when I played through it. So when I played through it, I got the full kick in the teeth that the developers, Naughty Dog, basically wanted me to get. So it was hard to watch a beloved character die so soon into that experience. I had to stop the game, turn it off, and come back to it later because I was not happy with that choice. But I also, from the perspective of a writer and as a storyteller, I understand why I think they did that. And I think the reasons they did that and the way they tell the story to justify that choice is why a lot of people are having trouble with the game itself, and why so many people are basically just saying it sucks, it's terrible, it's a mess. People feel betrayed because of what happens. How Ellie and Abby are basically the same character and that type of thing. And this is something that I really wanted to draw a parallel with, or at least draw attention to, is that that's, obviously that's intentional. From a story perspective, in a classical sense, this makes sense. So when I played through this game, after I finished it, I basically thought in terms of, this reminds me of Greek tragedies. This is a horrible world. There are forces outside of human control acting on people, and people are basically just following their destinies and not necessarily are powerless to change it, but the force of their will, the motivations they have for doing what they're doing are so strong that they're not going to be stopped. And then you see the messy consequences of those actions. Naughty Dog obviously was trying to deal with the idea of revenge and violence, empathy with your enemy, and the cost of all of these things in terms of the human lives lost, the people that you care about leaving you, the post-traumatic stress disorder that you're going to suffer as a result of this. Basically the horrors of war from both sides of the conflict. It's a very grown-up story to tell in some ways, and it's possibly more complicated than a lot of people want to experience in a video game, especially if that video game is primarily for their own entertainment. I mean, I don't watch a show or play a video game to be depressed about it. I watch it because I want to enjoy my time with it. I want to have fun and be happy at the outcome, and this game didn't really do that. So on the one hand, I struggled with this game. I really did, because part of me hates what they did, but the rest of me understands why they did it, and that's what makes me okay with why the game plays out the way it does. So right off the bat, kick in the teeth, Joel dies. You see Ellie, you see Abby, you see the end of Joel's story. And the the parallels between Abby and Ellie are pretty stark when it comes down to it. So basically, the way I look at this is when you start out as Ellie going after Abby, seeking your revenge, you're essentially doing what Abby was doing before the game started. So, as Ellie, you're hurt, you want revenge, you're willing to do anything to get it, and come hell or high water, you're going to go after these people and bring them to justice for the wound they've inflicted. Abby has gotten her revenge. She did what she had to do, essentially, to finish off and get closure for the hurt that was inflicted on her when Joel killed her father. And so she's trying to go back to normal. And you see that as you enter the second half of the game. And then in the final act, or I should say, and then when you see Joel at the beginning of the game, you see a character who has done all of these things already, is in the twilight of his character arc, essentially, is trying to atone for the things that he's done, and is basically trying to live out the rest of his days relatively peacefully. So you've got, this development where Ellie is doing what Abby was doing. Abby is doing what Joel was doing in the last game, and Joel is ultimately who they will turn into at the end of this once they get to the end of their road. Because that's the progression. The progression is, you start out looking for revenge, you get your revenge, you go into maintenance mode, essentially. And so that's kind of an interesting way of doing things, because it allowed the game developers to present us with a very violent beginning, which is, as an inciting incident, there's nothing more powerful than losing a loved one. So of course, as gamers, we want to go after the person who caused the problem, basically. And what I found in this game when I started playing it as Ellie, as I started moving through Seattle, is I was brutal against the enemies, the wolf faction that I encountered. I was basically taking care of everybody, circling back, making sure that I didn't leave anyone behind, that kind of thing. I was playing very aggressively, which is not necessarily the way I normally play a stealth action game like this. Normally I would kind of try and sneak past a little bit, but in this game I wanted that revenge to happen, so I was doing that, and I was actually sort of taking pictures of each of the characters as they were found or killed, the wolf pack, basically, that Ellie's hunting. And it was interesting to me because I was doing that as a way of kind of chronicling her journey, but I was also thinking about it in terms of, these are the trophies, right? This is the closure you get. This is the payoff you get for each of the things that have happened in the beginning, or the big thing that happened in the beginning of the game, and then each of the deaths after that is the payoff. And then in the middle of the game, everything flips, and immediately you are placed into another person's shoes. You're placed into Abby's shoes, who's basically the antagonist up until this point, the evildoer, the bad guy. You're placed into her shoes as a kid, and you then find out she has friends, she does good for her community, her motives may not always be pure, but she's doing her best, basically, in a bad situation. And all of a sudden, you have to make a choice. Do you empathize with her or not? And if you don't empathize with her, then the game is kind of ruined, because you're forced to play through 10 hours or 15 hours of storyline with this character that you initially hate. And I didn't find it hard to empathize with that character. The switch threw me as as a plot device kind of thing. It definitely threw me. But the more I played her, the more I felt like I was playing Joel from the last game. Her, just the way she moved and the way she handled. She handled a little bit heavier than Ellie did. She had weapons that were a little bit different than Ellie's. And it felt more like playing Joel than playing Ellie anymore. And that was interesting, because that means that, from my perspective as a gamer, she then takes the place of this super important character that I've just lost, essentially. And at first I didn't know how to react to that. I really didn't. I was, I stopped playing a few times just because I was like, okay, I understood what they were trying to do, but at the same time I was like, I don't know that I like this. It took a few hours before I kind of warmed up to her and warmed up to the idea of, okay, I'm going to see this conflict from the other side now. I'm going to see the reaction to what Ellie's done, because Ellie starts out as a victim and Abby starts out as a monster. And then halfway through the game, you start to see the other side where Abby has been victimized. And Ellie and what she does to the people that Abby cares about, that turns her into a monster from the perspective of the other side. So, in a sense, we all understand that if the victor writes history, we only get the winning side's story. But if you're telling both sides of a conflict, you're going to have human stories on both sides, and it's going to suck for everybody, because everybody's going to lose people they care about. And that's what this game is about, I think. The game really focuses on the tension between the idea of good and bad, and morality, and what is right and what is wrong, and blurring the lines there, because really everybody in this world, in this game, is just trying to survive in a terrible position, a terrible situation. Everybody's fighting for resources. Everybody's fighting the infected. They're fighting factions that don't agree with them. They're fighting for territory. They're fighting for food. They're fighting for whatever. And basically it's all about survival and doing anything that you can possibly do to survive. Whether you're in a small group, a big group, whether you have a base or not, whatever it is, that's the world that these characters live in. So the idea of right and wrong kind of is a lot more gray than we're normally presented with, especially in a video game. And that's one of the reasons why this video game is actually, in my opinion, transformative. It does something for the genre that we haven't seen before. And, I mean, maybe the closest thing I've seen to this is Spec Ops: The Line, where you're presented as the good guy, and then as the game progresses you start to see that actually you're the bad guy. And this isn't quite the same as that, but it's another way of accomplishing the same thing. I think the reason people have had such a strong reaction to it, though, is because, again, these characters, we've had a long time to grow attached to them. And when people do things with those characters that we don't like or don't agree with, and we've had a lot of that. I mean, look at the Star Wars franchise lately. We've had a lot of people taking prized characters that we really care about and just screwing them over and messing up our expectations, destroying our expectations, subverting our expectations, and ultimately taking the enjoyment out of what we've always enjoyed and what we always wanted to see. And so I get that. I get the anger and I get the frustration with this game and the narrative itself. But ultimately, from the perspective of a story, it is actually a complete story. It makes sense what they did and why they did it, and it closes off a chapter and potentially opens up a new one. And Naughty Dog has said it themselves. They didn't want to do a cookie cutter sequel. They didn't just want to have more of the same, where you're playing Joel or you're playing Ellie or you're playing both of them and you're wandering through ruins and killing more infected, etc., etc. They told that story in the last game, so they wanted to do something new and different. And I mean, again, I don't necessarily like what they did, especially with Joel, but I'm okay with it because of how the rest of the game plays out. And because the game is really about empathy and atonement and the price people have to pay when violence is essentially their way of life. So that's kind of my thought on the story itself. In terms of the gameplay, the game runs fine. It's great. I played it on a PlayStation 4 Pro, and it ran smooth. The graphics were fantastic. The scenery is amazing. The weapons all feel good. Aiming isn't too easy. Enemies are tough. AI is sometimes a little bit flaky, but not terrible, and I didn't really notice it that much. Camera issues and lighting are only a problem in sort of tight, dark areas where you can't really see what's going on. There's a battle with a melded infected that I found to be a bit frustrating, because honestly I kept getting backed into corners because I couldn't see where the heck I was going, and the camera just kept kind of flipping on me a little bit. So I found that to be a bit annoying. But those were few and far between. Those moments were few and far between. And honestly, the game made my heart race. It made me angry. It made me sad. It made me happy at some points. It disappointed me in some areas, like at the ending, for example, where it's just dreary. That bothered me a little bit. I thought that it'd be nice to get at least, if we're not going to get another sequel, as they've sort of hinted at, we might not. I would have liked something a little bit happier, a little bit more concrete than the sort of cliffhanger ending we get, where we don't know where Ellie goes and what her outcome is, other than the fact that she sort of moved on from this issue. And we don't know what happened to Dina or JJ. We don't know what happened to Abby and Lev. So it's a little more open-ended than I would have liked it to be. I can understand why they did it, but personally I would have preferred something a little bit lighter at the end, just so that I could say, okay, I got through that and there's a payoff, and the payoff is people are at least happy for the time being. So we don't get that, and that kind of felt like a letdown. Now, I have read a few comments and seen some things where people had some trouble with the fact that there are gay and transgender characters in this, and most people haven't mentioned that as a problem. There's always a few people who sort of seem to get pissed off at this. I don't know why. You may not want them in your video games. I personally welcome that. I think it's nice to see a more diverse group of people represented in our video games. It's high time we start seeing realistic portrayals of gay and trans people in our video games, just the same way as we've started to see more multicultural, more diverse groups of people and characters in video games and in movies and stuff like that over time. The same arguments that people are making against the inclusion of these people now, these characters now, they're the same arguments people made 50 years ago and 60 years ago against Sidney Poitier and against just the first woman director, the first gay leading character, the first black actor in a leading role, or the first non-stereotyped actor, racialized actor. So people of color have been dealing with this forever. The LGBTQ community has been dealing with this forever, and so to see that inclusion finally in games is really important, and that's one of the reasons why I think this is actually an incredibly important game for video games in general, because it's the first time we see really strong characters, realistic characters, going through a really heavy story. a really heavy story, and it's fascinating to watch the development of people. Now, admittedly, some of the characters aren't necessarily developed as much as they could have been. Jesse and Yara, or Jara, I think her name was, they kind of felt a little bit tacked on, kind of like people who needed to die in place of the main characters, and so they were put in there to elicit the response, but also, take the place of someone more important dying. So it did feel like they could have played a larger role. Like, as soon as Jesse showed up, I was like, I know he's going to die. As soon as Lev and his sister showed up, I knew that she was going to die. And it just sort of, because it fits the pattern. And the same thing with Abby's friend, who I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he gets shot this exact same way Jesse gets shot. And that's like, the parallels between these characters they're really strong. And they're just at different stages of the same journey. And so that's what I think Naughty Dog was trying to focus on. That's what I think the main message behind the game is. That's why I think I didn't have a problem, ultimately, with how they did it. And I actually enjoyed the game and had a good time with everything. And by the end of the game, I was playing it different than when I started. So at the start, like I said, I was violent, and I was going after, all the different, wolf and enemy characters that I could find, and just taking them out. And then I started to play as Abby, and at first I was doing the same thing with her, but then Lev comes into the picture, and all of a sudden I start sneaking around people, and all of a sudden I start going back to that old pattern of trying to either outsmart or avoid conflict, outsmart my enemies or avoid conflict whenever I could. And that's what reminded me of the original game, and what made the original game great, is that ability to choose between full-out warfare or sneaking or tricks or distractions, that type of stuff. I really, really enjoyed that part of it. And the other thing about this game that's really great is the accessibility points. I watched a couple of reviews that mentioned just how in-depth those options are, and then I checked them out myself, and it's incredible. And the fact that a person with limited or no sight can play this game and experience it is frankly amazing. And it should be sort of standard practice for this entire industry, for the gaming industry in general, to produce games like this. Because, for one, it just means more money for them because they broaden their audience anyway. But two, you can tell better stories the wider your scope is in terms of the people you're reaching out to. So the broader perspective and the broader sense of humanity that you have represented in a game gives you more canvas to paint. It gives you more leeway to tell stories that you otherwise haven't told already. We've all played the straight white male protagonist 1,000 times. That's basically been the model for video games going back 30 years, 40 years, however long you've been playing video games. That's kind of, from Mario 1 all the way up until Uncharted 4, it's always been a straight male protagonist, largely. Sometimes every now and again another game comes out that's a little bit different. They do something a little bit strange, but then you get into stereotypes. You get into, female characters like in Bayonetta, where high heels and quick changing outfits and suggestive content, right? And that's a problem, because that turns off an entire sector of gaming, the gaming community, the gaming audience. It's, some people like it, and that's fine, and some people don't, and that's fine. And so when you have that tension between those two groups, generally to move forward, you have to get a little bit more realistic. You have to grow up. And that's what this game does. It grew up. And I'm an older gamer, you know, I'm not 20. I'm way older than that. I'm not 25. You know, I've got a few battle scars of my own from life. I've experienced loss, I've experienced joy, I've experienced failure, all that stuff. I've luckily never had to fight a war for anything, or experience that level of violence, but at the same time, you know, I understand pain. And that's the story that was being told here. And I appreciated the way they handled it. They handled it very respectfully. Even though a lot of people have pointed out the flaws in what they've done. And I mean, that's all fair criticism. If you didn't like the game, if you've played it and you legitimately just hated what they did, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with any of that, because ultimately that's who you are. I would say though that if it's the characterizations, so if the fact that a character is gay or trans that bothered you and you couldn't play the game because of that, I hope that you either research it a little bit to come to understand and empathize with people who are just different than you, or you just stay out of everybody's way, because you will not be on the right side of that argument. And it's really going to hurt your ability to work and exist in the world as we move forward. That's just the way it is. So I don't really have much more to say than that, really. I like the game. I think it's one of the defining moments in video games. I think that it's well executed. It's not entirely what I hoped it would be, but it was not a train wreck by any means, and a lot of people thought it was. It's definitely not that. It's got depth, it's got emotion, it's got all the good things that a story does. It has a defined beginning and end. It has character development. It has all of the things that you need to complete a story. I think it's just, like I said, I think it's a creative choice that was made that people don't agree with, and that's why there's so much hate, and that's why people are lobbying for a remake and all the rest of it. But really, this game is fine the way it is. I'd like to see some bug fixes, and if they could tack on a slightly better ending, that would be nice. But other than that, you know, I give this game a very strong recommendation. I think it's something everybody should play, and if you can't play it, I think everybody should watch it or listen to it, because it pushes boundaries that haven't been pushed before. And to me, moving video games forward is going to require that type of work. So, you know, yeah, it sucks that we had to get there by going through something like this, but at the same time, the fact that we're all talking about it, the fact that our reactions are so strong to this, means they did something right. If no one was talking about this game, if it was like, meh, it wouldn't be successful. So the fact that there is so much discussion about it means that Naughty Dog developed an ass kicker basically of a product. And the problem is that, you know, sometimes that means kick ass, and sometimes you get your ass kicked. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you do, please like and subscribe. I've put a sort of a different version of my review from my blog up. It's down in the description below, so if you want to read more on that, you can click there. And please leave your comments. Feel free to disagree with me. All right, talk to you guys later, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.